Hello, welcome to History Lessons. This is Ritika Dotteroy, and today our topic is the European Renaissance. So, the word Renaissance itself means rebirth in French. It began a process of changes in many directions. It was in such dark conditions that the Renaissance swept like a beacon of light in Europe. From 14th century AD to 17th century AD in Venice, Florence, Milan, Genoa, and other Italian cities, there was a glorious revival of enthusiasm for the learning of art and literature among many ancient Greeks and Romans. This revival and its spread throughout Europe was called the Renaissance. The Renaissance remarks the birth of modern times emerging after the Middle Ages. This period actually changed the pattern of people's lives and thinking. It was time of great accomplishments and literature that developed during this period. The Renaissance was also an era of growth and exploration. So there were many factors that had led to the European Renaissance. What were those factors? Number one, the Crusades. Number two, the fall of the Constantinople. Number three, the invention of the printing press. This is one of the major factors that had led to the European Renaissance. That is the invention of the printing press. Now the Crusades, number one, in many ways, the Crusades of the 11th and the 12th centuries AD provided the stimulus for the Renaissance. They created in the West a liking towards the Eastern products such as spices, muslins, silk, oriental rugs, etc. So as this liking for the Eastern products grew, they started doing trade with the Eastern countries. And as they started doing trade with the Eastern countries, they started adopting the cultures and scientific cultures of these countries. So this was one of the reasons that had led to the European Renaissance. The second was the fall of the Constantinople. So Constantinople was the capital of the Byzantine Empire and a major center for learning. When it fell to the Turks in AD 1453, Greek scholars fled from Constantinople and took refuge in Italy. They brought with them manuscripts of Greek poetry and politics. This reintroduced the concept of republic, democracy, realism in art, scientific inquiry, and humanism to the Italians. Now the invention of printing press, which earlier I said it's one of the most important reasons that had led to the European Renaissance. The invention of the printing press in the 15th century AD dramatically increased interest in reading and writing of books. The art of printing spread rapidly. By AD 1500, there were 1700 printing presses in European towns. The number of middle-class people who could read and write considerably, and the new literature brought by the Greek scholars deeply influenced their attitude. The development of printing gave a spurt to the spread of new learning among the middle class. So what were the features of the European Renaissance? Number one, it was secular writing. This period saw the birth of secular writing, that is nothing related to religion. It's completely secular. Writers and poets told tales of ancient bravery and chivalry. Thus in England, they wrote about King Arthur, Knights of the Round Table, and the Holy Grail, while in France, wandering minstrels sang of Charlemagne's adventure. The concept of nation started finding a place in the minds of the people. People started identifying themselves with a country or nation, and their first loyalty now belonged to their nation. So these kind of ideas grew. The second feature was the humanism. A new movement called Humanism grew in strength during this period. Humanism was a system of thought which emphasized the worth and dignity of human beings. It expressed deep faith in the creative potential of people. They were urged to seek joy in this life rather than in an afterlife, which the church advocated. Humanism flourished vigorously in the Italian cities, which had come into greater contact with the Eastern world. The third factor was the spirit of scientific inquiry and rationalism. So earlier, people did not used to question the church regarding various factors. People used to think that whatever the church said, those were the true words, and beyond that they did not ask anything. But as this entire process of Renaissance grew, people started questioning the church, and they understood that whatever the church said, that wasn't the ultimate truth. So there were many Italian cities that rose as the center for culture. Among that, number one was Athens. Athens became the most popular city for literature, poets, and other cultures, and also for scientific ideas. Second was Florence. It became the second Athens. Athens was a major center, as I said, for culture, philosophy. So was Florence. Florence also became a major center for scientific ideas. There were many writers and painters, sculptors and architects who grew in these cities. Libraries of classical knowledge and literature came to be assembled by the Pope and wealthy nobles. A return of Roman architecture. So in the medieval age, we saw Gothic architecture. Gothic architecture, another name for medieval architecture. These architecture had a different style with sharply pointed arcs, lofty spires, stained glass, pointed arcs, which was unlike the Renaissance architecture. The Renaissance architects made use of pillars and columns, arcs and hemispherical dome. The finest specimen of new style was St. Peter's Church in Rome. Brunelleschi, an architect, was the first to study and use the ancient Roman style of architecture. So the realism in art. The Renaissance saw the rise of several famous artists, each of who had a unique style of painting and enjoyed great prestige in the society. The Renaissance artists looked upon art as an imitation of life. They took great delight in expressing the sides of the natural world and physical beauty of men and women. This required close observation of nature and of human beings. The Renaissance painters and sculptors closely studied the anatomy, gestures, and movements of human beings. As a result, the paintings and sculptures of the Renaissance period were realistic and secular, as opposed to the art of the Middle Ages, where the figures were flat and styled and expressed religious ideas and moral values. The growth of regional languages. So how did the regional language develop? For centuries, the language of scholarship and literature had been Latin, which only the educated could understand. The Renaissance marked the emergence of modern European languages such as Spanish, Italian, French, English, German, and others. Main contribution to the Renaissance. What were the main contribution to the Renaissance? Number one was art. So there were many artists called the Leonardo da Vinci. The Leonardo da Vinci was a genius. He was a painter, an anatomist, a scientist, and an engineer. His well-known paintings include The Last Supper and Mona Lisa. His 19 notebooks contain studies of the human circulatory system and plans for a type of aircraft and submarine. The second most important artist during the Renaissance period was Michelangelo. Third was Raphael. So Michelangelo and Raphael, they were two other brilliant Italian artists of Renaissance. Michelangelo was a painter, a sculptor, and an architect and a poet. He decorated the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome and painted the famous fresco, The Last Judgment. He was the architect of St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. One of the greatest works of Raphael in the fresco School of Athens, which shows an imaginary gathering of ancient Greek philosophers and scientists. Raphael's painting, Cowper's Virgin, a beautiful representation of the Madonna and Christ. Astronomy. During the Renaissance, several discoveries were made in the field of astronomy as well. Copernicus was one of the astronomers. Nicholas Copernicus, a Polish scholar who lived in Italy, put forward the theory that it was the sun and not the earth that roamed. It was the sun and not the earth that was the center of the solar system, and that the earth moved around the sun and the sun did not move around the earth. This was the view, was the center of the universe. This was the view held by the philosophers of the time and the church. Copernicus' theory was condemned. However, the Copernicus theory sparked of a new interest in the nature. Though the theory of Copernicus was completely condemned by the church people especially, but this actually rose a question among many Europeans. This was one of the main factors of European Renaissance, we have said earlier. Galileo was another famous astronomer. The invention of the telescope was done by Galileo. This made the entire Copernicus theory very easy, that actually the earth revolved around the sun and not the sun revolved around the earth. Medicines were also introduced, many different kind of medicines. Andreas Vesalius wrote the first scientific text on the structure of the human body in AD 1543. This was followed by discovery like that of the Enthusian tube in the ear and the valves in the vein of the human bodies. Literature. Now, Shakespeare was one of the most important poets of that time, who used to write plays, and those plays were actually performed in many theaters. So William Shakespeare, who was a poet, a playwright, whose plays were performed all over the world, dominated the English Renaissance. He first became an actor in London and then started writing plays. A Midsummer Night's Dream, Macbeth, and Romeo and Juliet are some of his famous plays. The Renaissance in England was different from that in Italy. Unlike Italy, England did not have any great painters or sculptures. The focus here was in two areas, literature and exploration of the seas. The cultural renaissance was led by the poets, writers, and playwrights, of whom Shakespeare was more significant. The other giants of Renaissance literature were John Milton, whose Paradise Lost is the masterpiece, Edmund Spenser, who wrote lyrical poetry, and Sir Thomas More, a lawyer and a scholar. So this is the entire concept of European Renaissance, that how European Renaissance brought a dramatic change in the Italian cities and many other cities, and this actually rose a feeling among the people that they can actually question the church and they should not blindly follow whatever church said. So there was this mixed combination of cultures and scientific ideas that grew during this entire period of time that had marked Renaissance as a modern age.